Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. Hot off the presses is the 8th edition of the Giving Report, published by CanadaHelps in partnership with Environics Analytics. In the 2025 edition, CanadaHelps looks at the period of 2018 to 2024 to understand how giving has evolved during a period shaped by crisis and transformation. The COVID-19 pandemic and a series of major national and global disruptions have influenced how Canadians give and which causes receive support. They also emphasize how important it is for charities to innovate and be flexible in an age of massive change and challenge. To help us get an understanding of the key findings of the 2025 Giving Report, please welcome Allen Davidov, Senior Vice President and Practice Leader of the not-for-profit Energy, Transportation, and Public Sector at Environics Analytics. With nearly 20 years of experience in marketing, analytics, and fundraising, he's worked with organizations of all sizes to unlock the value of information in decision-making and business strategy. Welcome to the podcast, Allen.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start by perhaps having you give us an overview of the report? What were some of the high-level trends in this year's report?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of interesting looking at this year's report. Some high levels are, one, some good news stories were that giving is up. We've reached an unprecedented mark of $12.8 billion. That's with a B, which to me was incredible given all that's been going on in the world and all that's been happening. And it's seen a sizable increase of $1.35 billion. So for the sector and all the struggles that it's been going through and all people that give across Canada, I thought that was a pretty interesting sort of insight. And one of the first things that when we looked at the data, we were quite surprised to see. The other one I would kind of highlight is that more Canadians gave. So we have now over 5 million people that have actually given across the country a gift at one point that has gone through CRA. So that, again, is an increase. And if you think about that, that's about 13% of the population. So I think that's really says something that a lot of Canadians continue to step up and continue to support local and sort of national causes of all different types across the country. So that was really great insight and sort of some trends to see that those numbers are going up. Obviously, as we've seen over the years, healthcare and education still lead the way in a lot of the donations in areas that people donate to, whether they're closest or experience something, education, they're going through school. Those tend to still be the highest. And when we think about things like the environment, when we think about Indigenous peoples and causes, those have seen increases, but not to the same degrees. And we're still looking at smaller dollars. So people are reacting to things that are coming up and giving, but as long as it's not on the radar as much or it's not as loud in the news, people don't necessarily notice that. So that was kind of an interesting trend to see that those areas are still being given to, and the percentage changes are quite significant, but not to the same scale as you see in sort of the traditional categories that people have been giving to over time. And then the other one I would say that really stood out to me was local giving. It's when we look at the different groups of donors across the board from the EA perspective and the different target groups, we're looking at that local giving has it always has its peaks and valleys, but we've noticed that in the giving trends that local giving has sort of peaked up again, and people are starting to give more locally than they have in the last number of years. So that's an interesting trend, and it's something I'm sure we'll get into, but it's a big topic of discussions I know across from a lot of our clients when it comes to giving. So we saw it in the trends and in the data, and that was quite surprising to see again.
Well, as you say, the data indicates that there were increases in donations in 2023 and 2024. And, that is kind of really quite remarkable given the challenges that we've been facing recently, and concerns that a lot of people have had around the economy and their ability to meet and pay their bills. And I'm curious, um, as well, you've mentioned that 2023 may have been a record breaking year. Can you elaborate on this? And are there any gaps in the data that we should be aware of in terms of trying to really be cognizant of any nuances in terms of interpreting these results?
Yeah, there's always going to be gaps in the data, and I think when we think about donations and giving across the country, there are a couple of gaps that come up. So new mechanisms, new ways of giving through crowdsourcing has come up over the years, and that doesn't always get reflected in the numbers. Or if you think about our immigration, and that's been in the news a lot, and new immigrants and new Canadians coming on into the country, their habits and sort of what giving means to them hasn't really been clearly identified and understood. So we're still digging into some of that. And if you think about new Canadian patterns of giving, there's a lot of discussions about giving back home and sort of what that looks like. And again, you're not being tax receipted if you give money back home or even to a cause back home in the same way. So there are going to be gaps in the data. It's what we're able to sort of see, and people have been tax receipted, and what the CRA is able to provide along with our own data on top of that. But I think the trends are quite intriguing and are still true across the board, even with those gaps that remain. So looking at the different age cohorts and how they're giving, or how their giving is represented in their values and the meaning, and giving to a local cause versus one that has a global sort of perspective, or if they're if they care about money, or they're worried about money, I should say. And obviously the tariffs and sort of all the like political stuff that's happening, and people are starting to think about, okay, so up to a certain point, it's felt good coming out of COVID, and people were feeling positive, and now the climate's changing. So what does that look like for their giving? So the gaps probably more exist in those areas, and understanding how do different organizations pivot, how do they sort of get to understand their donors a little bit more and engage with them a little bit more, to understand what the sensitivities are, what the opportunities are, and how do they overcome the things that they're constantly being thrown at. Like if we think about Canada Post and all sort of what's happened there over the last 6 to 8 or 10 months, charities have had to do a lot of leapfrogging and jumping over things. So I would say it's, the trends and the information in the giving report are, I think, quite clear in the sense of understanding donors is really key and important, and understanding sort of how they want to engage with you can help you better sort of plan a pathway forward, whether it's through digital, whether it's through in person, or whatever it may be through events. I think the data really showed that different cohorts are giving in different ways, and it means something to them. So despite all the gaps and whatnot that we know exists in the marketplace, I think it's pretty clear what the opportunities are for charities of all sizes, big or small.
Well, I want to talk a bit more about the opportunities, but first I want to address something that you made mention of, which is really the kind of geopolitical changes that we've had recently that have a huge impact on our economy and the financial well-being of Canadians generally, and certainly fears around the recession. Of course, the election of Donald Trump south of the border, only happened in November of 2024. After which we heard a lot about tariffs, and are now seeing tariffs imposed upon us now that are quite significant, that would impact our economy. I'm curious, is there ability to see any of the kind of data that you're looking at, now in the latter rather, I guess, quarter of 2024 and now halfway through 2025. Have you seen any kind of data that could give us some more recent insight?
Yeah, so looking at the different sort of cohorts that have given across the country over the last number of years, it's easy to look at some of the income and some of the opportunities that exist based on, again, when you think about their values and what they worry about. So what we know as two trends, if I start there, is that one, those that have wealth, some of those donors will pull back because they're thinking about investing in opportunities that exist. So those that are super wealthy, that have a lot of money, will always continue to give, but they will also pull back a little bit just because if there's a stock market opportunity or there's other opportunities to buy to make money, they will jump on it, and they'll usually pull out the monies that they're thinking about donate, and those funds may come, but just at a later date. And then the other groups that we often talk about on the mass fundraising side is, the middle class, if you call it, the younger families, those that are just building up their wealth, those that want to get engaged and they're giving at smaller amounts. Those are the two, like that is the secondary group that we often think about. And the data really shows quite clearly that they will continue to give, but they give smaller amounts because all the uncertainty usually unlocks, for them, it's, maybe we should just pull some money aside just for that rainy day or just in case, because you just never know. So they will give, and instead of maybe $200, they'll pull back to $100 and they'll give to less charities, or, potentially to the same amount, but a smaller amount. So looking at those two groups, and when we think about all the uncertainty that's happening, you have one that will really focus on trying to make money, and then potentially that will still go to a charity in some way, and another one that will claw back a little bit. So the trends that we've seen from 2018 to even now in the giving report, in helping us sort of map pathway forward, is really looking at how do we engage with those groups. And it's coming back to one of the things I said off the top is, I think the biggest value that this book can, or the themes that it can come back with, is getting to know your donors really well. So engage with them, talk with them, getting to understand them, understand what their barriers are, understand where they are, and how they would want to support your charity, whether it's through volunteerism or continued giving. We have to continue to ask those questions. And I think that will help a lot of charities try to get through the next little while, as, everyday Canadians are trying to figure themselves out, like what's today going to bring and what barriers might exist, because we just don't know, with all the stuff that's happening out there, how things are going to react to tariffs or closures or strikes or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, that's what I would really lean into that.
I wanted to sort of address a related issue, and one that we've been hearing an awful lot about is a potential for a recession. And I'm curious whether your data provides you some insights on what an impact a recession could have, given that we've heard from many people, in economic experts, about the potential of that, particularly if these tariffs continue. Is there anything that we can learn from experiences in previous years, for example, in the 2008 crisis, that will help nonprofits and charities sort of navigate through a potential recession?
Yeah. So the data doesn't necessarily forecast out potential downfalls or areas, but what it does highlight is people's sense of what's important and what they will support regardless. So people that have a sense of duty will always kind of try to step up with whatever dollars that they have to give to areas of need. So if we think about the wildfires that are coming up, people that have that sense of duty within their values, or the different groups and cohorts, will continue to step up in different ways. And again, it might be smaller amounts. It might be $5 versus a $20 gift. It might be $20 instead of a $100 gift. So the denominations of that we've seen, as we've seen in previous sort of recessions, will come down, but they'll still step up to support. Because if there's a war going on, there are people coming over, new immigrants from that war-torn area, as an example, they'll support them and step up, whether it's clothing or monies or other things, as we've seen Canadians continue to do. We've seen that in wildfires as well. But the amounts will come down. So what I would say when it comes to recessions is stepping into understanding why people are connected to your cause, and if you should continue to ask those people, or what groups of people make the most sense to ask, is really the lessons that we've learned over the last number of decades, and the last number of recessions, going even back to 2008, is that you, one, need to continue to ask, but two, need to understand what the tone of that ask is and who are the right people to ask and what way makes the most sense. So, but Canadians, again, as you would know, Mary, Canadians step up regardless of the situation. They will always, always step up. And I think that's what we've seen in all of the numbers. It's the not-for-profit hasn't had it easy, and they've always stepped in for government services or to support areas where there are significant gaps in services, and Canadians continue to support. And the $12.8 billion shows that's a pretty big amount of money that people have put forward in small donations as well as big ones.
Well, I'd like to get back to some of the specifics of the report. What role did major donors play in the uptick in the donations that's been seen? Is this both an opportunity and maybe even a concern for the sector, given that the report also indicates that wealthy donors are accounting for 59% of the overall increase in giving dollars? And a lot of those, I understand, are boomers. They're, potentially aging out. So how do we balance the kind of nuanced picture that paints?
Yeah, so boomers, wealthy donors, older donors continue to make a big slice of the pie. Unfortunately, the donor pool has actually come down a little bit. So we've seen a decrease in the trends by about 3%, but the donor revenue size continues to actually grow in terms of their contribution, and it was seen roughly around 11% growth year over year. So they continue to be to your point, the sizable donations across the country. So as we think about that, the other parts that a lot of charities need to really be considering is the wealth transfer. So that is something that's also, to your point about boomers getting older, some of them passing away, or some of them actually, based on what's happening. And if we come back to that recession piece and the cost of living going up for the younger generations, they're actually passing some of their wealth over sooner. So one of the trends that we've seen, and we've had a lot of discussions about, is that wealth transfer is now happening both at the end of life, when people are deceased, but also right before people before they pass away. So that's an interesting other component of this sort of area, that as we kind of think about a recession and moving forward, that wealth transfer will continue to happen. So, younger people can't afford houses, so their grandparents step in and they sort of give them some money. And then we're also seeing that same trend about charities. They're then thinking about, well, I can give some money to charity right now as well as when I pass away. So that wealth transfer will continue to happen and only grow as that aging population gets older, and all of that sort of money that they've accumulated continues to grow as well through all their sort of wealth and stocks and other things that they've invested in. So another way to look at it is, what's the opportunity we have with those donors, as along with their other family members that might be slightly younger in different cohorts that might be accumulating wealth.
Interesting. That is, it's a fascinating way of looking at it as well. And it should focus the attention of where this kind of donor engagement should be continuing to evolve. As I guess it's sort of like following the money, really, but to put it in perhaps not a it's usually not an appropriate term to use for something that we're talking about in this kind of environment, but really that would be sort of pretty good advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. As we think about all the different sort of cohorts, and they're getting older, and we're sort of engaging with them in terms of what are their wishes when they pass away, just thinking about, well, they actually have wealth now. So some of them are also coming to realization. And I think we, as just not even just Canadians, but humans, when you go through big life events or things that catastrophic, global things like COVID happen, you kind of rethink, your life and what you want to contribute to and sort of the lasting impact you want to make and your legacy. Which we've seen in a lot of these different donor groups, is that value is so strong and high in a lot of the donor groups, is that sense of duty, but also legacy, is like, what's that opportunity for a charity? Because that could be life changing for a charity, that one donor could step in, that, a charity that maybe drives revenue of about $1 million or less can get one endowment or one big gift that can really change the trajectory of that charity. So leaning into some of that as crafts, or how it sounds, is not the kind of terms that a lot of fundraisers or the not-for-profit are used to hearing, but following the money is really important, I think, especially during these times.
Couldn't agree more. I guess I wanted to explore another part of the demographic kind of information you were able to glean from your data. Your work on this year's giving report included new data analysis related giving behavior based on demographic commonalities. Can you tell us more about this and what that means and what some of the results were?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways that we look at giving is through our PRISM segmentation data. So it is typography that takes all of the postal codes across Canada, the 780,000 of it, and we've segmented the entire population. So every single postal code is represented from coast to coast to coast. And with that, we're able to then layer on top of donation history, as well as giving patterns, people's values, their behaviors and attributes, and their demographics. So based on that, then we're able to sort of group cohorts together that have similar values, that have similar demographics or geographies. So if you're thinking about urban groups versus suburban groups, or you're thinking about town dwellers or rural, I can't say that today, Canadians, there are some commonalities across those groups. So when we look at it through the lens of demographics and PRISM, we're able actually to group some of these donor clusters together to really look at what are those commonalities. So if we're looking at younger generational donors that are in the urban cores of, Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto, what are those similarities that they have that different organizations can tap into from a marketing perspective? So if they need to pivot from, sending something in the mail to online, and they're thinking about, well, I have $1,000 campaign. How do I use Meta or TikTok or others? Or which one do I use? They can use some of this data and sort of how we partner with a lot of charities to help them highlight which of those mediums make the most sense. And then how do you just go activate in those platforms? So again, if you have $50 campaign and you just want to run a test campaign because you're a small charity and you just want to get the awareness of your cause out, all the way through the bigger charities, and you're spending tens of thousands of dollars on a digital campaign and an acquisition campaign, you can take a lot of these clusters and demographics that we've actually showcased in the giving report and actually go activate against them and then see how they responded. So what charities have been doing offline when we think about direct mail, we send out a mailer to a group of donors that we get a list, and we see how they did, and we see which ones actually, what the cost per gift was and the cost per acquisition. So now we could do it digitally as well. So a lot of what we've showcased in the giving report can help a lot of smaller charities think about it from a digital perspective. So in a time that you need to pivot and you may not have a channel or a resource like Canada Post, some of these charities could be thinking of, okay, so how do I bring this online? How do I not just talk about my cause and raise awareness, but actually go and ask for money online as well? So by using some of these cohorts, by using some of these segments, or what we call donor segments and audiences, they can then translate it for their charity to say, I just want all the wealthy donors. What are some of those characteristics that make sense for me? And then how do I just go to Facebook and go activate a small little campaign, or go to Instagram or TikTok, whatever it may be. I'm not as familiar on TikTok. My kids definitely are, or Snapchat and all those. But I know that a lot of charities are starting to branch out. So I think using the typography of PRISM and these audiences that we built out within the book to showcase where donors are coming from and what are they exhibiting in behaviors and their values and messaging, a lot of charities of all sizes can kind of tap into that and just think about, what does my marketing need to look like if I just need to change how it looks in June because of X? Or if I think about my holiday campaign and Giving Tuesday as an example, which is always a really big online event. Like, how do I maximize Giving Tuesday and start thinking about that without having a mail drop or in combination with a mail drop? So there's a lot of great use cases, and we see a lot of success with charities of all sizes starting to look at, when I'm targeting, let me target a little bit better and getting to know my donors.
Um, I found it very fascinating when I was introduced to these kinds of, I guess they're, as you say, donor audience or clusters of, attributes to these particular people based on where they might live, for example. And I'm curious because of course, we all want the audience to read the report, which has got it synthesized to in such an effective way. But can you outline some key attributes to some of these different clusters that you referred to, just so our listening audience has a clearer idea of what they should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I think about some of these, like I'll start with wealthy families, and some interesting attributes that popped up for us is some areas that they give to. So they're very keen on giving to religious organizations, things that they're personally connected to. So again, charities that they have an affinity to, that may have had an experience. Um, they tend to be less diverse, but their values are really, to what I spoke about earlier, is about leaving a legacy and a sense of duty. So they have that sense of duty. So a lot of the wealthy target audience or families really have that sense of duty to fill in the gaps where the government can't or other services can't. And they tend to lead the way, but it's really interesting because they also have teenage or adult children. So they're leaving the nest in some cases. So some of their disposable income is going up, but also just their general wealth. So that was an interesting sort of view on wealthy families, and looking at whether it's one-time gifts or monthly giving. They do give. They give to Indigenous causes. They've given to environment at lower numbers, but significant enough that some of those charities should definitely ask. And they still feel comfortable enough to give online. So that is one of the attributes that we think about when we look at these different groups, is which one's used to giving offline versus online. And now with new platforms that kind of fill in your information, you don't have to wait and fill out like a ream of pages of information, made it a lot easier and safer. So groups like the wealthy families are starting to give online to peer-to-peer programs to their neighbors, their family members, as they walk and do different things. If I think about those urban sort of, or suburban and rural families, slightly younger, slightly less money. If we think about the Canadian average income is about 122,000. This group still sits at 152, which is significant, a good chunk above. They tend to, similarly to wealthy families, give to things that they're personally affected, and different causes. And given the age, they're probably what we would call the sandwich generation, where they have younger kids. They're not teenagers. They're a little bit younger than that, but they also have parents that could be older and going through their own medical or some health issues. So sandwich generation and taking care of different groups. You see, they're the ones that usually also are thinking about their finances. So I mentioned earlier, there are groups that would be worried about finances and trying to save money for a rainy day or when things change. But they will continue to give. So it's interesting where some of these families reside all over the country, but places like Halifax and Hamilton come up and Ottawa come up. But they will give local as well. So they will give across the country, but they will give locally as well. I thought that was an interesting group to kind of look at. Again, they've given millions and millions of dollars as a collective group to one-time gifts and monthly gifts. So these are groups of people that you still want to ask for that $20 monthly donation, and they will continue to give if they can. They may change it to a smaller amount because they're financially really worried, but they also understand sort of the charity perspective and making sure that charities are supported. And if I highlight one last group, I'd really look at what we get asked about the most from charities is those sort of downtown donors. And again, I mention those because that is probably one of those up and coming groups that everybody asks about. What used to be the millennial conversation of like, how will millennials give? Should we focus on millennials? These are that new millennial group. Obviously, from their name of downtown donors, they're located in a lot of the big centers. So you have the Torontos, the Vancouvers, the Montreals. But it's interesting how this group, because they're younger, you are looking at somewhere between 25 to probably 40 years old. They have a sense of the global sort of causes a little bit more than the others. So they will give local as it's given its importance and the cause, but they also have that global mindset in terms of how am I making an impact globally. So it's not, I understand where my $5 goes and it can make an impact, or my $20, but I also want to think big picture. And how is that sort of different than just giving locally at small amounts? And they give to Indigenous causes, environmental causes. So it's interesting when you think about like these three samples of target audiences. They're quite different in their age and their life stage, where they are with kids or families, or they're married, and they're giving in so many different ways, and charities are engaging with them in different ways. But some of these groups, like I said earlier, a little bit more technology savvy, and some of them have a little bit of a hindrance because maybe they haven't been giving online as much. So when we think about all the different things that are happening, and I know we've mentioned this a couple of times, this is a great opportunity for some charities to also think about educating donors, because it's not just the assumption that all donors will give online because that's an easier medium to do it. But I think a lot of donors just haven't done it, or they worry about security of their information because they hear it in the news a lot. So for some of these groups, it might be just more an education to say you can tap, things get filled out really quickly, everything's secure, depending on the platform that we're using, etc., whether it's CanadaHelps or others, super easy. It's just more of an educational piece. So again, it always comes back to know your donors, where they fit into these different cohorts that we've highlighted in the giving report. Understand some of those attributes of online giving, offline giving, why they give to a cause, and sort of their viewpoint on the world and how they feel they can make an impact. And I think that's a great way that charities can really lean into the giving report this year in this political climate and sort of the time that we're in, to say, I can see where my donors are represented based on some of these groups that we've highlighted. So if I see these wealthy families here, maybe I can get a little bit more of a sense of how they're thinking about utilizing their funds during this time. Are they thinking about investing it, or were they invested it with us instead of in the stock market to make money? Or, our cause is really important and we really need funds right now for, a new building that we're building, or to help research, whatever it may be. Would they think about making that investment now because we need the dollars now? So it's about that tone and all that other stuff. So coming back to your question, Mary, I'd really say that charities can really lean into these different cohorts and in the information provided, the demographics of these groups, and really see which ones are represented in their sort of donor files, CRM, etc., and see how do they think about strategically engaging with them.
I do recall that there's some very interesting findings around giving to Indigenous causes as well. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've seen that Indigenous causes have seen a little bit of a downturn in total donations. But the total amount actually year over year, or through the course of the last couple of years, have gone up significantly. We're seeing triple digit growth. Unfortunately, it's still a small part of that pie. So what I would say for Indigenous led causes is really understanding who's been giving to you and the rationale behind it, and what are the opportunities that exist. So whether we're looking at education, and really looking at educating people about what does that mean, because when it's not in the news and it's not in the spotlight, and the need is not glaring, and people don't really associate that as one of those sort of first causes they think about. I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of Indigenous causes to think about how do we educate people of why it's still important, why we think about that sort of cause as something that you should be giving to. So it's similar to other causes, like the environment as well. When we don't, when we don't have a crazy hot day or a really cold day, and the seasons seem to be opposite, like we've been having lately, depending on where you are in the country, we don't think about the environment. But I think it's an important opportunity for all the environmental sort of causes to say, well, if it's not in the news, how do we educate people on the importance of the environment and giving to the environment and making it tangible? And I think that tangibility in either cause or any of the causes that we talk about is something that people are always looking for. So how is my, $5 or $100 or $1,000 going to make an impact? So as we know, anyone within the fundraising sector, when it comes to downturns and you're looking for donor dollars, it's all about impact and storytelling. So it's a great opportunity for Indigenous-led causes as well as environmental and the others that we've seen people continue to still give to. Maybe think about how do they continue to educate the Canadians from coast to coast to coast about the importance and why it's important to give back to Indigenous causes and why it's important to give to environmental causes, because I think both are really, really important.
Yes, I guess we're captive by the news cycle to a certain extent, especially recently with such dramatic events that have occurred to threaten our economy and our sovereignty as a nation. It tends to be what's top of mind, I think. So you're right. It's about the communication and being able to bring to the attention of Canadians just the importance of Indigenous causes and reconciliation, as well as other kinds of causes that may have taken a back seat in recent days in the news cycle. Looking ahead, I would really like your advice about what you think organizations really need to be aware of as we move through the latter half of 2025. What advice have you got for them to wrap up our discussion today?
I'd go back to a couple of the points that I made earlier. It's just it's a good opportunity to sit down and really dive into your donor database and get to know your donors. So there are different ways to do that, whether it's major gift donors or the bigger donors, and sort of calling them and just touching base with them and seeing where they're at and sharing the impact that you're making and their connections. Maybe sending out some donor surveys. I know a lot of charities oftentimes don't like to do that, but we see a lot that do have better connections with their donors. So it's not just about sending them newsletters, but asking for their opinion on things. So sharing those stories and sort of at the same time asking for input in terms of what are they not hearing, what are they not like, what's important to them, what do they like to give to, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say as fundraisers, we know that we need to lean into our donor base a little bit more and our donors and getting to know them and get closer, just like we did during COVID. COVID wasn't an easy time period for anybody in any way. And, it wasn't easy for donors, but a lot of the charities that we saw that reached out to their donors to check in on them, just to see how they're doing, just to see like what's happening in their world. And again, just asking just basic questions. They're the ones that were the most resilient. They're the ones that did really well when it came to donations. They're the ones that were able to appeal their cause to those donors and still be engaged and understand when to ask and when not to ask. So I think as we, what we've talked about today is all this uncertainty is happening and it probably will continue for some time. I think it's a great opportunity for all charities to lean in a little bit and to get to know their donors again, and then use that information also to grow their donor bases. Because I think that's great insight from your own sort of closest, best supporters, and then to think about, okay, so they're still willing to support us during this difficult time, even though they might be struggling. So maybe we think about a new campaign that looks like this based on the advice. So it's all about leaning in a little bit and being there with your donors, with your community, and really moving forward together. I think that's the best advice I can give, and I think that's what we've seen time and time and time again through different stages and things that have happened over the decades, where charities are really successful when they do that.
Well, Alan, once again, it's a pleasure to speak with you, and we always look forward to the incredible insights on the sector that Environics Analytics and CanadaHelps provides in the annual giving report. It offers invaluable insights and advice for charities across Canada to navigate these very challenging and changing times. Thank you for joining Charity Village Connects.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.